Good day, everyone. This video covers the catastrophic 1953 accident involving Chesapeake and Ohio Allegheny locomotive number 1642. On June 9th, 1953, at approximately 5:25 p.m., Chesapeake and Ohio Allegheny locomotive number 1642 was traveling on an eastbound train when a boiler explosion took the lives of engineer Wilbur Anderson, his fireman, and his brakeman. Going over the notes about this accident, in my opinion, this is something that should have and could have been prevented, and I think you'll understand where I'm coming from after I read these notes off to you. So the last annual inspection of Allegheny number 1642 was made at Clifton Forge, Virginia on July 25th, 1952. The last monthly inspection was made at Hinton, West Virginia on June 5th, 1953. This date was 4 days before the accident. Allegheny 1642 was out of service for the months of February, March, April, and May of 1953 and was returned to service on that June 5th of 1953, again 4 days before the accident. So on June 5th, an engineer reported that the water pump wasn't working and to clean the governor. A C&O shop machinist logged that he had cleaned the cold water pump governor. A second report on June 5th from the Allegheny 1642's engineer reported that the water pump quits working and requests to clean and examine the governor. There is no report from the shop machinist log that suggests that this problem was looked into and dealt with. So then we go to June 7th, and Allegheny 1642 engineer reports that the water pump stopped functioning 3 or 4 times. A C&O shop machinist reported that the water pump was tested and it checked out okay. And then we skip to June 8th, and the Allegheny 1642 engineer further reports that the water pump won't work and wants the governor and the cold water pump replaced. There is no log entry from the C&O machinist on this particular report that states that the work was actually done on this cold water pump. So now we've established a clear history of a water pump on Allegheny 1642 not working properly. So when the engineer makes a report for the third time about this water pump, the machinist is probably frustrated and thinking something like, "Yeah, I've already looked at this thing twice. I'm not gonna do it a third time," and then does nothing about it. And I think this way because there have been several incidences of this kind of maintenance indiscretion in the aviation industry that directly led to accidents. And furthermore, back in the 1950s and whatnot, this kind of indiscretion could be easily swept underneath the rug and never reported. So in other words, the media never gets a hold of it and it's not reported. So I think this is what led to the actual accident for the Allegheny 1642 was the indiscretion of a maintenance person dealing with a problem for the third time. Let me know what you think about my theory in the comments below. Okay, so we've reached June 9th, the day of the fateful trip, and it should be noted here that on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, at all terminals, the feedwater pumps and the low water alarms are tested. So with that in mind, on June 9th at 11:30 a.m. at Hanley, West Virginia, a machinist filled out the prescribed form showing that these tests had been done. So once again, it's June 9th. Allegheny 1642 is going eastbound and makes a stop at Thurman, West Virginia, take on coal. And then Engineer Anderson asked the foreman there at Thurman to check out the cold water pump governor and see if it was stuck. In my mind, there's only 2 reasons why Engineer Anderson would ask this to be done. One, Engineer Anderson is nervous about the third incident on this water pump not being handled correctly, and he's got that Star Wars vibe of, I've got a bad feeling about this. Or 2, something hokey was going on with the water pump again, and he wanted the foreman to check it out. So basically, the nature of Engineer Anderson's request is really unknown. It should also be noted here that a machinist at Hanley, West Virginia, the point of which Allegheny locomotive 1642 was last dispatched from, stated that he tested the water pump before the locomotive departed and he did not find anything wrong with the water pumps. Now mind you, this was stated during the investigation after the accident had happened. And to me, this is what any machinist would say, in order to cover their tracks. No pun intended. So going back to the June 9th stop at Thurman, The foreman, of which Engineer Anderson requested to check out the cold water pump governor, basically checked it out, found it to be in working order, and he reassembled it. He then went to the engineer into the cab to examine the squirt hose which operated the cold water line. He washed down the cab, and the locomotive was put back on the train at that point. And from there, the locomotive gets back underway. So Allegheny 1642 is cruising eastbound at about 20 miles an hour, where it passes a machinist helper who was standing between 150, 175 feet from the track, and at that point was about 1.5 miles to where the boiler explosion occurred in 1642. He stated that when the locomotive passed him by, the engineer was seated in his usual position in the cab. The fireman was in a bent position on the left of the engineer, and that the low water alarm whistle was going off. And the exhaust from the stack sounded as if the engineer was working at a medium throttle. Something about this just doesn't add up. Why would the engineer and everybody else in the cab be in their normal positions, so to speak, and not looking to be taking any action against this alleged low water alarm whistle going off? Did they not hear it? How could you not hear it? I mean, did it go off at all? You know, it just doesn't add up to me. Well, something was for darn sure, and that's the fact that the locomotive boiler wound up blowing up 1.5 miles down the track. Now, as a locomotive crew back in the steam days, I'm not sure what the procedure is to do in the event that these low water alarms are going off. My assumption is that you stop the locomotive and you get your butts out there and dump the fire immediately before any further overheating can occur. But again, I don't know, so anybody that's knowledgeable, let me know in the comments exactly what you would do in a steam locomotive if you've got a low water alarm going off. Okay, so to continue on with the story, a telegraph operator on duty at a cabin at the time of the accident stated that he received a telephone inquiry concerning Allegheny locomotive 1642, and he looked down at the track and saw the train approaching from a distance of about 600 feet. He arose from his chair, and as he again looked at the approaching train, an explosion had occurred. He stated the locomotive appeared to disintegrate and then was obscured by steam and smoke. After parts of the locomotive stopped falling, he called the train dispatcher and reported that the locomotive 1642 had blown up and was wrecked in front of his office, and he requested that an ambulance be immediately dispatched to the scene. He further stated that he noted nothing unusual when he first observed the train approaching, and that the locomotive sounded as though the engineer was working at a medium throttle. A roundhouse foreman and a sheet metal worker stated that when they arrived at the scene of the accident at about 5:30 p.m., he saw water running from the left tank hose which had been severed, and then that water had continued to run at about 6:10 p.m., and that no water was coming from the injector overflows. At the point of the explosion, there were 2 tracks on the left side of the eastbound main, the westbound main, and the switching lead. And on the right side, New River ran approximately parallel within about 55 feet from the eastbound main. The force of the explosion tore the boiler from the frame and cylinder connections, and it was thrown upward and forward. The boiler struck on its front end on the rails of the eastbound track approximately 440 feet ahead of the point of the explosion, and then rebounded. The backhead struck the track 639 feet ahead of the point of the explosion, where the boiler came to rest on its right side in reverse position, with the front end on the adjacent westbound track and firebox on the switching track. The smoke box front was blown off and several superheater units were blown outward. The engineering cab was blown some 133 feet to the rear and 50 feet to the right of the point of the explosion, where it fell at the water's edge of the New River. Grates, the grate bars, throttle levers, and other parts were scattered for distances up to approximately 772 feet from the point of the accident. Some of the parts had fallen into the New River itself. Many of the locomotive's peripherals were badly damaged, and some parts could not be located. The track rails at the point of the explosion were indented by the trailing truck wheels, and the two rear pairs of driving wheels in a westbound track was moved approximately 5¼ feet to the left. At the point where the front end of the boiler struck the tracks, the rails were broken and badly bent, and a large hole was torn in the roadbed. Where the back head of the boiler struck, the westbound track was moved some 3 feet to the left. The locomotive running gear with tender attached came to rest with the front end alongside the front end of the boiler, with only the trailing truck wheels derailed. All tender truck wheels were derailed and the front truck was off-center. The tank was skewed to the left in the left front corner, leaning approximately 10 degrees to the left. 9 cars were derailed and bunched. Five were approximately 90 degrees angle with the rails, 4 of which had been on their sides. As mentioned earlier in the video, engineer Wilbur Anderson, his fireman, and his head brakeman were killed. The engineer's body was found at the water's edge of the New River, approximately 75 feet to the rear of the cab. The fireman's body was found in the cab, and the brakeman's body was found in a ditch on the left side of the tracks near the point of the explosion. After the investigation was concluded, the cause of the accident was found to be an overheated crown sheet due to the lack of water. Basically, the crown sheet is the roof of the firebox and has to be covered with a certain amount of water at all times in order to prevent overheating. Generally speaking, once you get an overheating of the crown sheet in a steam locomotive, what you get is a rapid expansion of steam and steam pressure that expands so quickly it cannot be contained, and basically it just explodes. And that sounds like what happened here with Allegheny number 1642. Also with crown sheet overheating, the ceiling of that firebox, which is the crown sheet, could actually collapse and cause an explosion of the firebox that way. I don't believe this is what happened with 1642. I think it was with the 4 cause in this particular incident. And the last thing to note about this incident was the fact that the C&O Railroad had given Engineer Anderson's widow a $10,000 settlement for the loss of her husband. Now, $10,000 translates to roughly $112,000 in today's money, which to me is an absolute joke of a settlement provided by the C&O. My first guess is that Mrs. Anderson didn't have a lawyer and naively took this payment for the loss of her husband. Because in today's world, there's no way that anyone would settle for that little amount of money, especially when the company, in this case the C&O Railroad, was likely responsible for the accident itself. And I say that because of the questionable maintenance history on this faulty water pump that likely caused the accident to begin with, of which I'm referring to the maintenance logs that we cited earlier in the video. Okay, so with that, we'll wrap up the video. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the content today, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and also turn on all of your notifications so you can see future uploads from the channel. And visit our print shop at Nickel Plate Limited at Etsy.com to help support our efforts in bringing these videos to you. All right, thank you once again.